B-roll, devastated Gaza streets, long lines for aid, UN buildings. Why does the United States, and many governments across the Middle East, keep backing Israel even as Gaza collapses into famine and destruction? Today we break down the politics, the money, and the legal questions, and ask the toughest question: why, as of August 2025, has the international system failed to stop this humanitarian catastrophe? B-roll, timeline graphic, October 7, 2023, 2024, 2025. In the nearly 2 years since the October 2023 escalation, Gaza's civilian toll and humanitarian collapse have become one of the worst crises in the world. UN agencies and NGOs warn of starvation and record child malnutrition. I'll show you the data and then unpack the reasons behind continued political and military backing. Sources in the description. What form does US support take? US support is not just statements. It includes massive military assistance, weapons sales, logistics, intelligence sharing, and diplomatic protection at the UN. Since October 2023, the US has approved extraordinary packages and emergency authorities to speed deliveries of military aid, and Congress/administration actions have resulted in billions in support and weapons notifications. Independent trackers estimate tens of billions in support and related expenditures tied to the conflict. At the Security Council, the US has repeatedly used its veto or rejection power to block resolutions that would force a ceasefire without strings the US finds unacceptable. Which Middle Eastern states are aligned, and why? Map with UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia annotated. Middle East support is not monolithic. Some Arab governments, notably UAE, Bahrain and others who signed the Abraham Accords, normalized ties with Israel between 2020 and 2024 for economic, security, and geopolitical reasons. Others, like Egypt and Qatar, play mediator roles but have their own security and domestic constraints. Gulf states' priorities include containing Iran, protecting trade and investment ties, and preserving domestic stability. That calculus can produce tacit cooperation or quiet diplomatic channels with Israel even during intense condemnation in public forums. Why do the US and some regional states back Israel? Short, direct reasons. 1. Strategic alliance and regional security. Israel is viewed as a long-standing strategic partner for the US in intelligence, military technology, and as a counterweight to Iran. Gulf states also see relationships with Israel as a hedge against Iranian influence. 2. Military, industrial and financial ties. US defense firms, procurement pathways, and aid, much of it spent on US-made equipment, create political momentum to sustain support. 3. Domestic politics and lobbying. Pro-Israel political constituencies in the US and aligned policymakers make sustained backing politically palatable for many American leaders. 4. Fear of escalation and hostage diplomacy. Policymakers argue that immediate, unconditional pressure could endanger hostages or spark wider regional war. They prefer carefully managed pressure tied to deals for hostages and security guarantees. 5. Realpolitik and normalization gains. Abraham Accords and economic ties mean some Arab states prioritize stability and economic integration over public solidarity with Palestinians, at least at the diplomatic/state level. So why hasn't the world stopped the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza? The short answer: power, politics, and logistics. Here's how they combine. UN limitations and veto politics. The UN Security Council is the primary body that could demand enforceable action, but the US has vetoed or blocked ceasefire drafts that don't meet its conditions. That deadlocks collective action. Legal versus political definitions. Human rights groups, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israeli human rights groups, have publicly concluded Israel's conduct may amount to genocide or crimes against humanity. Those are legal determinations that increase pressure, but legal findings do not automatically force state behavior absent enforcement mechanisms. That gap leaves survivors dependent on diplomacy and voluntary pressure. Control of aid flows and operational constraints. Israel controls most entry points into Gaza, Egypt controls Rafah. Even when funds and pledges exist, getting food, fuel and health supplies into populated areas has been massively constrained by security restrictions, looting, and damaged infrastructure. UN agencies report only a fraction of needed supplies are reaching civilians. Risk of wider regional war. Many governments, the US and regional states included, fear that a heavy-handed international intervention could spark escalation with Iran, Hezbollah, or other actors. That fear pushes them toward cautious diplomacy rather than forcible measures that might stop the fighting immediately. Fragmentation of international will. Europe, the UN, and many civil society groups call for ceasefire and humanitarian access, but with limited leverage to compel compliance. National interests and alliances override unified action. What do human rights monitors say? Major human rights organizations and some Israeli NGOs have concluded that Israel's conduct amounts to crimes that include acts of extermination and may meet the legal threshold of genocide. UN agencies warn Gaza faces starvation with acute child malnutrition at record highs. Those findings increase calls for accountability, but prosecutions and sanctions are slow and politically fraught. What would it take to change course? Real change would require combinations of things: credible multilateral enforcement, hard to achieve given vetoes, domestic political shifts in donor states, large-scale diplomatic bargains that secure hostages and a ceasefire, and pressure, economic and political, from allies, corporations, and publics. Alternatively, a breakdown in the status quo, major regional escalation, could force different actors to act, but that would be catastrophic. Bottom line, the tools exist politically and legally, but the political will and coordination are currently missing. Cite UN and policy analyses. B-roll, protests, relief convoys, congressional hearings. This is not just geopolitics on a map, it's choices, arms, diplomacy, vetoes, and aid corridors. If you're watching, ask, do our leaders' actions reflect values they claim to stand for? If you want to learn more, I'll link sources below so you can read the reports yourself. And if you care about concrete steps, support verified humanitarian groups, contact representatives, and stay informed. Hit subscribe for deeper explainers. Drop questions below. What do you think is the single biggest reason the crisis hasn't been stopped? I'll read the best comments in the next video.